Welcome to Write Good, the podcast that helps you write good. I'm R.S. Benedict. In this episode, we're talking about sex work, what writers get wrong, and how we can and should do better. Joining us is Mistress Snow, PhD. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you for inviting me. I am Mistress Snow. I received my PhD in the humanities within the past 5 years. And so last fall, I wrote an article that ended up going semi-viral on Twitter entitled, "I told my mentor I was a dominatrix and she rescinded her letters of recommendation." So in short, I told my mentor I was a dominatrix and she pulled her letters of rec. I was on the academic job market last fall. It was my fourth round on it. Last summer, I fell into some financial straits when, summer teaching fell through. I'm an adjunct currently and have been for a while. So, I returned to sex work to make ends meet. And I disclosed that to my now former, obviously,
Right.
mentor, who reacted disastrously and decided to just abandon me entirely.
Oof. And I really want to stress for our listeners who might not be familiar with this, the academic job market is absolutely brutal. Adjuncting pays peanuts, and those letters of recommendation are vitally important. It's kind of like the feudal system in a lot of ways. If you don't have those, you're fucked.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when you apply for a tenure track job, you need minimum 3 letters of recommendation. She was number 3. So, I went to go apply and was like, where did Anne's go? Oh, shit. She did not tell me she was going to rescind it. She just, did that furtively. Yeah. So
senior professors have immense amounts of power over like adjuncts, over grad students, over people who are kind of new at it. It's just rigid hierarchy, like brutal hierarchy. It is fucking rough.
Yeah, and that's why, offices like, inclusion and equity exist, and why Title IX is gonna have their way with her now. But that's besides the point.
Right.
I've since been using my platform on Twitter to talk about labor issues within academia, class stratification within academia, the plight of adjuncts, as well as sex worker advocacy. And I've been trying to use my anonymity to talk about things that an academic or a civilian might not want attached to their name.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And the reason I wanted you on is that a lot of pop culture, a lot of literature includes sex work, or is about sex work, or the protagonist, our studly male protagonist, visits a sex worker. But sex work is featured in literature and pop culture quite a bit, and has been since the very beginning. The Epic of Gilgamesh has a really important character who is a sex worker. She's the reason why Enkidu joins civilized humanity and creates the world's greatest bromance with Gilgamesh. But as with many real-world things, a lot of writers just plain get it wrong. A lot of writers write inaccurately about it and often promote tropes that are kind of harmful or dishonest, and I think it's better to just write in ways that are honest and truthful, and to avoid pushing stereotypes that can have some genuinely negative consequences on real-world human beings. So for this episode, I'd like to talk about what writers do wrong and how we can do better. So why don't we first start off with what writers do wrong? And why don't we start with something kind of blunt and a little bit heavy, which is something that people sometimes call the disposable sex worker trope.
Yes. So, the disposable sex worker, right, is like a plot device when you need some kind of nameless, faceless victim to propel the plot forward.
Right.
So you just find, a dead hooker, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of, and I was trying to think of examples of this earlier today, and I was having a lot of trouble. because that character or lack thereof is,
Yeah, it's
intended to
hard
be
even to remember
forgotten.
them.
Right, you're not
Right.
supposed to because it's not the point. And I mean, this like clearly bleeds into real life when we see that, or we don't see that, I hope, but serial killers,
Right.
for instance, will disproportionately target sex workers because no one's gonna look for them.
Right.
And there's an assumption that one might only turn to sex work if one doesn't have a support system in place, which I mean is often the case. But therefore, no one's going to be looking for this person. It can be just this nameless victim that you can, project your fantasies of violence onto and move on.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the Godfather movies, I want to say, had some of these.
Dexter season 1 had a bunch of those. The serial killer that he's sort of creating his weird distant friendship goes after sex workers over and over again, and until he goes after Dexter's sister, who's not a sex worker, so she's important because she's related to the main character. It's like, oh no, this we gotta stop. Like, okay.
I want to say American Horror Story has done this as well. Maybe like season 5, Hotel. Was that season? I think that was season 5.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, yeah. No, but they're intended to be forgettable. Or like CSI, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
I was so into CSI when I was in high school. I had the box set of like like DVDs. And yeah, there would so often just be a dead hooker. And the point is to find, whoever killed her. That's who matters here, the murderer, not the victim.
Yeah, the murderer or what the detective is going through.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, a detective will be like, oh, my long lost daughter or whatever. Yeah.
You're a symbol, you're not like a person with feelings, and that's pretty fucked up. It's pretty fucked up to treat someone like that. I'm sorry.
Oh, it absolutely. I mean, and we see that with similarly like criminalized populations, like drug users are also also tend to fall into, and I mean they tend to go hand in hand too, right? Like I'm thinking of that Jack Kerouac novel, I forget the name, but I mean it's about this prostitute with whom he had a relationship in Mexico City, and she's also an addict. Or Stephen Crane's Maggie, if I recall correctly, which I haven't read that book since I was in college 1,000 years ago. But yeah, Maggie ends up dying like, spoiler alert, this like fallen woman. I think she's a drunk at that point. The implication being that sex work is so horrible and dehumanizing that you have to self-medicate to keep on going. Yeah, and I mean that has, I mean, it's a chicken or the egg thing. Like, does that have real world consequences because of how we perceive sex workers? But we think Black Dahlia, for instance. I want to say she was a sex worker, but I mean that may be wrong. But I'm pretty sure I'm almost positive she was. Where people will choose sex workers to experience, like, to work out their sadistic fantasies because they know they can. And, we as a criminalized population can't quite go to the police because, that they'll say, oh, well, it was a theft of services or something like,
Right.
Yeah, that's a really quite dangerous, like, plot device that a lot of writers, I think, don't even consider, because a lot of people don't even consider sex workers as people, as people that, like, everyone knows a sex worker, right? Everyone, even if you don't know it.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, I feel like I was teaching a class recently. I mean, before, the plague hit, and said something like, well, everyone knows a sex worker. And my students were probably like, well, I don't. And I'm like giggling to myself, like, yes, you do. Your professors.
Yeah, or I mean, not necessarily someone your own age. For all you know, your aunt might have put herself through college in ways she did not tell you. I mean, people have complex lives, and I'm going to guess most sex workers don't tell their families and friends about that because people can get really judgmental.
Yeah, as I learned the hard way with my former mentor.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's illegal and it's stigmatized a lot, so it's not easy or safe to tell everybody, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it is, some of it is legal in a lot of states, like
Well, that's true.
Nevada.
That's true.
Prostitution is legal, domination is legal in a lot of areas, stripping
Hmm.
is legal in a lot of areas, but even still, it doesn't matter
Right.
to, yeah,
Right. Yeah. Even if it is legal,
it's still like
or
illicit. Yeah,
yeah, it's still stigmatized heavily.
right. Or like, porn is legal, but
Yeah, but it's going to be hard going to a normal job interview or something. Or what about your family? Does your father know? Does your wife know? Like, yeah.
oh, geez, yeah. No, my father doesn't know. Good Lord.
No,
Yeah.
he can
But
watch something else, okay?
oh,
Look.
Jesus, yeah, God. But yeah, that's certainly a really dangerous trope.
Right, right,
Because
right,
I feel
right.
like some of these aren't necessarily dangerous.
Right. But just kind of an obnoxious cliche, like, oh, come on.
Yeah, like really, like, but some other, like, some are stereotypes that are like annoying but harmless. But something
Right.
like the disposable sex worker,
Yeah.
or like the evil whore, that's a
Right.
dangerous
Right.
trope.
Right. Well, what is the evil whore trope?
So the evil whore is essentially when a sex worker is portrayed as just a sadist, who likes to destroy men and steal their money, like Black Widow kind of
I see.
situation. Yeah, and I'm thinking of it's shoot, what is it? Steinbeck's East of Eden. Kathy slash Kate in that is just this like horrible evil whore who destroys men and eats right through them. Like a man eater, I suppose. And of course, in these paradigms, the men are the innocent party here who are being taken advantage of. Or I'm thinking like if you saw the film, what was it called? I hated this movie. Hustlers, was that it? The J-Lo movie
Right.
last
Yeah.
year?
Hustlers, I think.
Yeah, where these strippers will like drug men and take their money, like these innocent men who are just going to objectify women and end up like getting roofied or whatever. That I see as a really harmful stereotype in
Yeah.
that it.
This woman who provides a service for a job took money in exchange for that service? What the fuck?
Yeah, and then it's portraying the victim
Buddy.
as the client who
Right.
generally in these exchanges has the power in the scenario. Like the fact that sex workers are predominantly women should speak to that. Like, yeah, these people are the like clients are not the victim here. Clients can be victimized, certainly, as we see in something like Hustlers, but that just
Right.
further demonizes sex workers as these sadistic, man-eating, moralless, like monsters.
Right. Okay. Because that's one I hadn't seen very much, which is kind of interesting. Here's a trope that everybody's probably really familiar with: the so-called hooker with a heart of gold.
And yeah, like that one, I kind of like secretly kind of like.
I mean, at least it's like positive of her. She's a character. She's got feelings and a plot arc, and she's sympathetic and stuff. She plays like a major role in the story a lot of time.
Yeah, so I mean I guess the dichotomy there is that she has this sordid past, but is now atoning, or she's seen a lot of the world and therefore has this like exceptional insight into humanity, or the what's the word I'm looking for? What's that? Shit, I can't remember.
The human condition to
Yes, thank
society.
you. I'm like, what's that thing that my students always put in papers that like infuriates me? Human condition. Yeah. Yeah. So I think of like, Mary Magdalene, right?
Oh, of course.
And of course, like, oh God, I got so irritated on Easter this year with the discourse. Like, was Mary Magdalene really a sex worker? Or, that's anachronistic. We wouldn't say sex worker, but was she a prostitute or not?
Right.
And, I feel like asking the question itself is kind of anti-sex worker, because to announce like, no, she wasn't a prostitute, that's inaccurate. It's like, well, then what's the problem if she was a prostitute? Like, what's
Right.
wrong with that? But like insisting that she was also like ascribes some weird kind of morality to sex work.
Right. Right.
Yeah, or like some kind of veracity to someone who's had to like, again, with a, yeah, it's like seen, who's had to see some shit or whatever. It's almost like a more pleasant, I find, relative of the like the rape victim who emerges stronger, you know. And this one's a little bit more cheerful in a way. Of course, the other examples I'm thinking of like are the opposite of cheerful, right? Like Sonia and yeah, like Sonia. But and you know, I haven't read Crime and Punishment since fucking high school. But is she not the voice of reason or morality rather for Raskolnikov, and like convinces him to come
give
forward
up his
and,
cruel ways and confess and atone and all that good stuff.
Yeah. Versus her, Svidrigaïlov's her father, right?
I have not read that book in a million years. I remember nothing. Everybody had like 12 names. I forgot all of them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, that's true.
Russia, too many nicknames. I can't handle that.
Yeah. Where she, you know, her like dastardly father. I want to say it's Svidrigaïlov. Maybe Svidrigaïlov just hires her. I can't fucking remember. But, you know, as opposed to these like men who fail their families. These women kind of step up. We see that in Maggie too, the Crane novel, where this character, you know, her family won't support themselves, so she will. This kind of, what's the word for when you're like a martyr? That's it. But yeah, it's the hooker with a heart of gold too. We see Satine, right, in Moulin Rouge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I, you know, and the fact that they're hookers, to use, you know, the trope term, is always like a point of contention for our like innocent male, I'm not a client character, right? Like doesn't that dickbag in Moulin Rouge like throw wads of money at Satine to say like, thank you for your service, like I'm breaking up with you, even though like he was never her client. It's just such a slap in the face.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the hooker with a heart of gold thing also tends to portray the client poorly. And I mean, I don't have the most sympathy for her clients all the time. I mean, I know there's some like wonderful clients whom I, you know, enjoy, but
well, I mean, it's like customers, right? I mean, if you're doing any customer service job, you probably aren't terribly fond of a lot of your customers.
Oh God!
When I waited tables, it wasn't like, man, I sure love this guy who puts his latte on a kitchen scale to see if I made it dry enough for him. That guy's fucking great. So glad he's here again.
Right? Like when I worked retail, I was like, oh, I love the dude who waits until my shift is over so he can ask me out outside.
Ew.
Yeah, right? Fucking Christ. But yeah, I mean, the hooker with a heart of gold, I feel like dehumanizes the sex worker in the opposite direction, in that it kind of elevates her to like a not supernatural or not like goddess level, though that is also dehumanizing. But you know, it how do I say? It makes her into almost like a Jiminy Cricket, like a sexy Jiminy Cricket, right?
Yeah, well, it's like putting someone on a pedestal. There's not a lot of room to move around at the top of a pedestal, and if you try to move around too much, you fall and you break your fucking leg. So it's kind of like that, like, oh, she's good, but only under these certain circumstances. This only if this wasn't really a chosen profession, only if she doesn't really enjoy it, she just has to do it, and only if what she really wants is our pure-hearted hero, and I just want to leave this life and be with you, and
exactly. And like ultimately, these characters end up either like leaving sex work, so like Pretty Woman, right? Julia Roberts' character, she just leaves it, or dying, like Satine. Yeah, there's no like staying in. I mean, maybe becoming like a madam or something.
Right.
But
but I like my job. I get to travel. I make shitloads of money. What?
Right. It's like, well, yeah, no, but now you're going to be with a man who makes you not need that anymore.
Now I'm going to be your boring ass wife. Fuck that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, no, that's another one that could just get, you know, frustrating.
Right.
Almost like a manic pixie dream girl, kind of.
Yeah, it is a very idealized version of it too, where a lot of times the hooker with a heart of gold never actually seems to work.
Right? Yeah, you don't see her.
Never like thanks, I like you a lot, but I can't meet Friday. I got a job to do. There's never, she's always endlessly available and almost like virginal,
Oh yeah,
which,
yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's like she only has sex when it's, at work,
Right.
which is something that is just endlessly irritating when clients and clients well, I mean, I get this most from clients, I guess, probably because I interact, like I have this kind of conversation with clients most, but when
Right.
they assume that your work is also your personal sex life.
No.
Yeah, like, oh, well, is this turning you on? And I'm like, nah, man, like you sucking on the heel of my foot is not turning me on. Why the fuck would you ask me that? No. Like,
It's like the guy who thinks the barista's really in love with him, only like way more so.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, there was this great documentary, Live Nude Girls Unite, and it was about peep show dancers unionizing. And I remember one of them saying, they chat with the clients, they have a conversation, and one of the most common questions they get asked is, "What do you do for a living?" And they're like, you're looking at it, dude. I'm not here for fun. I'm not here for my health. Come on."
Oh my God, I hate when I walk into a session and I'm like, okay, so like, or in like a meet, I'm like, so okay, so what do you like? What would you like to do? And they're like, whatever you want, mistress. Like, what I want is for
I
you
want to wear
to,
sweatpants and watch TV. Let's
yeah, I
do
want you to
that.
give me your wallet and I want you to put your pants back on and walk the fuck out of here. That's what I want. Like, and like half the time they do know what they want, they just don't want to tell you, so you have to do this like fucking like guessing game. God. 20 questions, like, is this good? No.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, they say they went cock and ball torture, and then like 35 attempts later you find out that they just wanted like a hand job, and then you're like, man, like you should have gone to massage parlor number one. It would be cheaper, like a lot cheaper. But number two, like, ugh, no. Ugh.
Ugh. God. Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, the stereotype is like women never come out and say what they want. Men are so straightforward, but
Oh
not
God, no.
really.
No, no. Well, I mean, I have had women clients and I've had like non-binary clients and couples and stuff, but like fucking men, cis het men. Ugh.
Oh gosh. Anyway, so we've got the two polar opposites of like evil and then heart of gold. What about the fallen woman? And I guess that does kind of tie into the heart of gold a little bit. There's some overlap.
Well, the fallen woman, I find this one is also kind of it's what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of obviating, precluding. That's it. Like, what are my GRE words? Precluding the sex worker stigma in a way, because it's presenting this rationale in and of itself for why the character is doing sex work. So like, oh, they were forced to do it to feed their child or whatever. Like Fantine in Les Miserables, right? She is kind of forced into sex work by circumstance, and we see her, when she sings "I Dream to Dream," just like emaciated and she sold all her hair, and like this sex work is just one of many like terrible things that have come about generally as a response to poverty, or as a way of navigating poverty.
Right.
And that too still perpetuates the stigma of sex work as shameful, or sex work as a last resort, which,
Right.
it often is a last resort. For me personally, it was a last resort, like when I had to do it last summer, but
Right.
it, furthers this stigma that the only reason that one would do sex work is because she has to, or because she is like morally bankrupt.
Right. And it's interesting how that's only when it applies to women. Like I did know a guy who
Oh yeah.
was basically a sex worker. So I lived in China for a few years, and a Western man is considered particularly attractive. So there was this Western guy, an American guy who was like tall, blonde, fit, who was basically like a sex worker for wealthy Chinese women. And because they were just he had a bunch of sugar mamas, I guess, and it was
Oh,
fucking
the
awesome for him.
dream.
Yeah, he was. And of course, everybody was just like, dude, bro, how'd you fucking do it? How'd you do it? Like, everyone was super envious of him, which granted, I mean, he's fucking hitting the male jackpot, but like, I could not imagine seeing that the reverse of, I don't know, a Western woman who's working as a sex worker with a bunch of like wealthy Chinese sugar daddies being like, you poor thing. Oh no. And not like, fucking high five, girl.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've sugared before. That shit is fucking miserable. Like sugaring I find to be the most difficult of the different like branches of sex work, right? Because it so resembles a romantic relationship. So like setting boundaries in a sugaring relationship is near impossible. It's
I can see that.
The worst. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I fucking hate it. God, I remember
that. Because I've seen like naive people being like, oh, I would love to have a sugar daddy. It sounds so great. And I'm like, are you sure about that? It sounds super hard.
It's so hard. The emotional labor is like next level. I remember I had a client ages ago who, when I was sugaring, who compared I never ended up having sex with him because of this. Well, and who knows if I would have otherwise, but he compared my insistence on using a condom to rape. He was like, I did not consent. What? I did not consent to a condom.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh, like, that is the grossest thing.
What? Yeah, no, I remember he blocked my number when I was like, are you fucking nuts?
Holy fucking shit.
Yeah, sugaring is so difficult.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, it's next level. It is next fucking level. But I guess I remember, in college, I would hear women in grad school too be like, oh, it'd be so great to have a sugar daddy. I'm going to go on seeking arrangement or whatever. But none of them would ever follow through. Maybe they go on a date or two.
Right.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk to the guy for an hour and you're like, oh my fucking God, no amount of money is worth this. I can't deal with this guy. This guy sucks so much.
You see his teenage girls as the background on his phone and you're like, oh my God, I'm 20.
Oh no. This is too awkward. I gotta leave.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to this guy mansplain why music was better when he was young.
Oh my God.
I don't need to listen to your old man opinions.
The club scene back in like the 90s or whatever. Yeah, no thank you.
No, so much more work. But oh God, getting off topic again. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
But the main thing is that because so much of literature is this male voice, and often like a straight male voice or an affluent male voice.
The literature that we actually read, the literature
right.
that's been admitted into the canon.
Right. The quote unquote important literature. I mean, you're not seeing this through the eyes of the sex worker. You're seeing it through the eyes of an observer, maybe a client, or maybe like maybe a client, or in general just someone who hasn't been through that life, and someone who unfortunately, like many people in society, has been kind of socialized to not really see these as people. Right.
We think like, oh, I don't know someone who would have did. Like, no, you do.
Yeah. And these sort of cultural stereotypes influence your thinking, they influence your writing, and that can, I think, influence other people for the worse. I mean, some writing can perpetuate these unfortunate myths. Like, there's a very all or nothing portrayal of sex workers a lot. There's either the, oh, I'm just here purely for funsies and not like it's a job, or we're all trafficking victims.
Right. Oh my God. Right. And I guess I was kind of downplaying the importance of this, but representation does really matter. I'm thinking of like, that show Glee from like forever ago,
right?
Which I didn't watch it, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do remember there was a study I read where homophobic people who watched Glee reported being like 20 or like 60% or something of them reported being more sympathetic and more to LGBTQIA people after watching the show. So like representation does entirely construct how we perceive these people, especially when we're convinced that we don't know any real sex workers.
Right, of course. It's easier to demonize someone when you don't know one personally.
Right. Or when you think you don't know one.
Or when you think you don't know one. Yeah. Well, again, like with homophobia, it's easier to demonize gay people when you don't realize that your cousin, who's a super nice guy, is one of those people.
Right.
Like,
Right. I try to emphasize that when I'm teaching any like particularly fraught texts, like before you open your mouth, consider that, statistically there is certainly a rape survivor in the classroom right now.
oh yeah.
So you better not say any fucked up shit or I'm gonna kick you out.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned too that a lot of this work stigmatizes clients or gives an unrealistic idea of who becomes a sex worker, who becomes a client. And we've talked a little bit about why or how people become sex workers and why maybe they don't. Like something I have noticed that in pop culture, sex workers are always thin. And of the sex work people I know who've done sex work, most of them aren't skinny.
No, no. Well, then I mean, they're either thin or there's like the BBW,
Right.
right? But yeah, no, that's another. And white sex workers are often portrayed as either a white or like
Right.
Southeast Asian, right?
Mm.
The whatever we perceive as like delicate, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and like the type of sex work that these characters will do often tends to be racialized. Like
Mm.
I'm thinking of media representations of Black women sex workers are often like street sex workers,
Right.
right? Versus white women we'll see working in a house or working like in a parlor or a dungeon. Asian
Right.
women as well. You'll see. I find maybe not, and I'm like I don't watch porn not because of any judge. I just don't find it particularly titillating, if you
Right.
will. But as far as like sex workers that I see in other media, Asian women are overrepresented in BDSM, whether as dominant or submissive. And I mean, I haven't like done this research, so I'm not like, don't quote me on these like stereotypes, which is what they all are.
Of course.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, all of these women are portrayed as skinny, and
Right.
if they're not, then it's played for laughs.
Right. Like what? Someone paid to have sex with that? What?
Right, like, or like I'm thinking, like the woman in Borat.
Oh, I never saw that one.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so bad, but it's so good.
Right.
Yeah, it's played for laughs. Like, oh, look at that, like disgusting fat crack whore, which also doesn't make any sense because I'm like, yo, if you're doing crack, you're probably gonna be
Yeah, you're
thin.
probably not chunky at all. You're not
No.
eating much.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the point is they're either unattainably beautiful or monstrously disgusting.
Right. Yeah, yeah. But what about the kind of person who's a client? Because very often, as you did mention, in pop culture, the people who go to sex workers are gross, creepy, yucky people. Especially, I've noticed in pop culture, the kind of people who go to a dungeon, who go to a dom, are usually these like pathetic,
Little
just
Woody Allen
awful
types.
little Woody Allens, are just like kind of repulsive people. It's never like a really handsome guy who's into it or just like a normal guy who's into it.
I remember we would whenever we'd get like a hot client at the dungeon, we call like hot for the dungeon. We'd be like, oh no, he's dungeon cute. But, but yeah, the assumption is that clients are going to sex workers because they need to pay someone to fuck them and they can't get laid otherwise, which just isn't the case. I'm thinking I like I have a fuck buddy in my personal life who's really quite attractive and goes to sex workers constantly just because he really likes having sex a lot. Like,
Why do you pay for sex? I enjoy it. I don't know what else to tell you.
and I'm like, I mean, like he and I will hook up for free, but yeah, that's the issue there. I think is it shames clients. It makes clients feel like, yeah, pathetic for visiting a sex worker when, like, I mean, or I think of a lot of clients who come to see DOMs think that they're somehow superior to someone who might go see an escort because like, oh, well, you know, they're married, but they're coming to see a Dom because they have some specific kink they don't want to tell their wives. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make you like better. That just makes you a liar.
Yeah, it just makes you bad at communication with your spouse. You don't know that she wouldn't be into it, dude.
Yeah.
Do you know how many bored housewives are reading fucking 50 Shades?
Oh,
fucking bring it up. She might be into it.
Yeah, no, I've had that conversation with so many clients. Like, well, why haven't you told your wife that you like having cigarettes put out on your tongue? And he's like, I don't know, Mistress Snow.
I think she might think I'm weird. Like, do you know how many women right now are reading books about, like, fucking werewolves? Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Women are way weirder and hornier than men realize.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Also, like, I mean, some fetishes I love because they're so easy on my end, like foot fetishes. I just have to like fucking sit there and make like $200 and just sit there.
Nice.
Right? So I'm like, yeah, if your wife doesn't want to fuck you, but you want to fuck her feet, like that sounds excellent to me. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, no, there's this assumption that if someone is seeing a sex worker, it's because they can't get someone to fuck them in real life. And that's
right.
Not only is that inaccurate, and not only does that contribute to clients feeling reluctant to see sex workers, which sucks for me because, you know, I got bills to pay. But, you know, if there's an encounter with a sex worker that's actually quite like lovely, then that functions to kind of dampen it. In the real world. You know, I think of like there might be some sessions that I actually enjoy. Like there's some sessions I find like really fun, or I know they're cathartic for a client and that like makes me feel pretty good. And then when I have someone like, for example, my shitty former mentor blowing up my inbox telling me how I'm a bad whore who will never get a tenure track job or whatever, that fucking bitch, that impacts how I feel about it. Like it's not just it's not just isolated in these media representations. Or I think of like the legalization versus decriminalization debate of how to like deal with sex workers in the United States. At least I know best because like I'm American. But like the Nordic model, for instance, criminalizes clients but not providers, which of course, like, I mean, it literally criminalizes clients, but it also ends up, you know, leading to further violence against sex workers.
I can see, because they got to protect their secret or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, where criminalization or legalization ends up. But now I'm like talking myself into circles and confusing my terms. What was I? The Nordic model. That's legalization, right? Where that ends up actually ultimately further harming sex workers. Because, you know, we still live under this like capitalist patriarchal hellscape. Any legislation that's going to police women's bodies or sexualized bodies in any way is ultimately going to be at their own expense.
Right.
Which, you know, starts from these representations that we see.
Right.
It also, now I'm like getting on a roll. You know, and it pathologizes clients as well by implying like, oh, you know, they're so weird, they have to go to a dom. You know, it wasn't that long ago that sadomasochism was in the DSM, right? Like these have real world consequences.
Yeah. And I mean, we've been talking mainly about misogyny, but for the queer community, the consequences are really, really heavy, just because sex work is a really big. It's big in the queer community too, for various reasons.
Oh yeah. Well, and it will discourage, and I mean, I would say with women, because, you know,
Right.
Like if I'm going to encounter queer people at work, it's going to be people who are interested in women.
Right.
But discourages them from seeing sex workers because they think it's not for them, or they think that, you know, I've gotten lots of DMs from especially older women who will say like, hey, I'd really like to see an escort, or I'd really like to see a dom, but will they see women? You think they'll see women? Like, I don't really know how to ask because I'm a woman. And I'm like, yo, half of the sex workers I know are lesbians, number one. Number two, the ones who aren't are like, we love when women come in. You're so much more respectful. We have so much more fun. You know what a boundary is. But because it's so stigmatized, it's even more rare, aside from the fact that women are less likely to have a disposable income.
Right.
Yeah. Stigma all around. It just ends up hurting women and queer people.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked a lot about how people get it wrong. So why don't we talk a little bit about how writers could get it better? And I think the biggest thing is nuance, just nuance and complexity, that there's such a tendency to stick people into these very discrete little categories, or you're all this or you're all that. You're a virginal hooker with a heart of gold, or you're an evil money-taking man-eater, or this or that, and you're a victim or you're just a monster. And the world is so much bigger than villains and victims.
Yeah. So I find in the portrayals of sex workers I've seen and appreciated, something that they tend to have in common is that there's no preoccupation over why the character went into sex work, by just presenting this character as a sex worker and not, first as a civilian and then tumbling into sex work, or,
Right.
seeing, someone like get their tuition bill or whatever. Just starting in medias res, I find kind of, obvious a question. And then, as a viewer, I mean, you might be sitting there thinking like, well, why did she do sex work anyway? Why didn't she just become a bartender?
Yeah.
But, a narrative that resists that question and refuses to entertain it, I find tends to peel away at some of these stereotypes and just avoid them entirely.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of like Cam, which is a film from, I want to say 2018. I was on Horror Vanguard.
Right. It's a Netflix horror movie, I think.
Oh yeah, no, it's excellent. But the protagonist is a cam girl, and she just starts out as a cam girl. There's no like, well, why did you go into this instead of into hairdressing or whatever? And
Let me
therefore,
have a flashback and show you my tragic childhood that led me to this.
Yeah. And then the viewers like less likely to ask. It's just not even a question, and that takes care of a lot of these issues. It just avoids them entirely.
Right. And I'm guessing that one really important thing to keep in mind, which something that I think a lot of writers inexplicably forget, is that sex work is work. Emphasize on work with all that entails. That can mean labor issues. That can mean, I don't know, overwork. That can mean work-related stress. I mean, any kind of job has some sort of work-related stress with it. As you mentioned, sex work has a lot of freaking emotional labor.
Oh Lord, yeah. Or like, I mean, the mundane details of it I find are important to include. So I think of like, when I would go in for a dungeon shift, like when I worked I mean, obviously I'm not working now because there's a goddamn plague outside, but
right.
When I worked at a dungeon, I would have, an 8-hour shift, and I would come in and I'd, like sit in the like dom room and wait, right? For a client to come in. And I would bring in my grading, and I'd be like sitting there grading student essays. And God, I remember getting into endless arguments with the managers at my one place because it was so hard to grade in the girls' room because there would always be like movies on, or like we'd be playing card games or whatever, and I like would need to focus. And we had a classroom dungeon, so I'd be like, can I just go sit in there and grade? Like, nice. Depending on the manager, they'd like let me or they wouldn't.
That's
like
great.
Boring shit like that. Or like when we finish a session, we have a bunch of paperwork to sign. Like that's something that you wouldn't necessarily think of.
No, that's never a part of the movies. You where the dom fills out a bunch of forms, stamps it. Yeah.
I think there were like 3 different ones I had to sign. Or like, I had to scan out each of the like tools that I took. So if I was taking like a whip, it had a barcode.
Huh.
Yeah, like Yeah, like really mundane things, which of course you're only going to know if you talk to a sex worker, which is
Right.
why sensitivity readers exist.
Right. Yeah, I guess I can see that because I mean, how many people walk home with pens or whatever from the office and like those are super cheap, but
Right?
like yeah, walking home with office equipment, slipping it in your purse, we've all done it.
Yeah, we've all
We've
walked with
all
like
done
a
it.
chastity device in our purse or whatever, forgot to leave it
Yeah,
at
getting
work.
those are a little bit pricier than a couple of shitty big pens.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Right.
Yeah. Or like, God, I remember I would get so mad to if I like got a tip when I was walking a client out and I put it in my pocket and then before I left I'd change because I'm not going to, leave go back into the world wearing like a leather skirt and a bodysuit and then I'd get outside and be like, fuck, I left my tip in my pocket and my skirt is in my locker.
Ah.
Ah. Yeah, so these little like when we think of it as work, if we have a scene of someone coming to work their shitty fast food job, you're going to see them clock in. That's like we see that's such a common scene, especially like TV shows from like the 80s and 90s, right? Where you'll see someone like punch the clock.
Yeah, you clock in, you put on your apron, you gossip with your coworker, you complain, oh, another day, another dollar.
Yeah, exactly. Or like,
Complain
oh my
about the
God,
boss, how much he
like, ugh,
sucks.
Kevin is here. Yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that often that doesn't really get explored at all. And I mean, of course, in a lot of media representations, sex workers aren't really working in a house necessarily. Or if they are, we tend to see it from the client's perspective. I'm thinking the only other portrayal I can think of off the top of my head is in Killing Eve, when, and I don't know if you've seen that, but Villanelle, the one protagonist, works as a sex worker in two separate episodes and then hides out in an Amsterdam brothel in another. So you kind of see it from the other side. And actually, in you know what? Actually, in Killing Eve, I now remember they do have her clock in. They have her like give her name. Yeah, and that's really. I mean, they must have like actually talked to a sex worker when they were, writing the scene. But yeah, no, it's a job like any other job.
Right.
I mean, not like any other job, but that's because we have these stereotypes.
Right, right. Well, any job has its own unique, I guess, challenges or its own unique stresses.
Yeah. Or like one of my favorite things to do when I was at the dungeon would be when I was cleaning up after a session, I'd like take a bunch of selfies because I thought it was so funny that I'd be in this like full on dom gear with like a full
Right.
face of makeup and then have these like gloves and like Windex and like mop or whatever. Thought that was hysterical. But yeah, no, focusing on anything you might focus on for portraying another kind of like wage labor position.
Right, right. And I think in the instance of this one, emotional labor, I know we've touched on it before, is I think a lot bigger than what people realize it is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The emotional labor. Well, because, people we're so puritanical that people don't want to or don't
Right.
have the language to or don't feel comfortable talking openly about sex and sexuality and their desires. So you have to intuit quite a lot, which
Yeah.
can be fucking exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people have a lot of hangups about sex and sexuality that you just don't know. And then you find it out the hard way when you start to do something or bring up something with a client and they like recoil. So yeah, the
Right.
emotional labor is just
Right. Right.
next level.
Right. Like when I was waiting tables, you'd have to deal with everybody's anxieties about food.
Oh,
Because women especially, have a lot of anxieties about like food and calories and this and that. And it's like, I just wanted to bring you a sandwich. I did not sign up to like give you counseling and soothe you through your emotions about this sandwich, dude. I did not sign like that. Only like I'm guessing way more so.
yeah. Or like when I worked retail, I'd have so many women especially, men as well, but mostly women who would have hangups about their size. And I have to be like, no, you're beautiful.
Right.
This is not my job. I am not getting paid $9 an hour for this shit.
Yeah. I'm not a body image counselor. I'm not paid enough.
Right?
Do you want the pants?
Right. Well, and I mean, I have students do this too, but I don't mind it when students do it because I do consider that part of the job, and also I like the students. But yeah, no, clients, and then when they want to be reassured that, you know, they're not just clients, or they're not like other clients, or you know, you're not doing this just for the money, are you? You're doing it because you love it, and you have to be like, yeah, I just, you know, I love just sticking my hand in men's butts. That's something I truly would do for free. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not something I would do for free.
Yeah, Guy, that barista really loves you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I know you paid for the latte, but the real reason she's giving it to you is that she really fucking loves you. And that's why the foam on top looks like a heart. It's a true expression of her feelings.
Devoted to the craft of, baristaing, whatever the fucking verb is. Yeah.
I just love making lattes so much.
I dream about it. Yeah, it's my passion. No, okay. And you know, I feel like the only laborers who or workers who are expected to have some kind of deep passion for their craft are sex workers, artists, and teachers. Right. Like, oh, you love it so much you'll do it for free, right? Like, no, and that's why we have a paucity of voices. Yeah. Because only the independently wealthy can, you know, go into academia, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, God damn. Yep. It is the worst. It is kind of interesting, though. Like, people do stigmatize sex work in particular and talk about how exploitative it is and how, like, soul-crushing it is. It's like, okay, have you ever fucking worked as a waitress?
Amazon,
like, that was pretty soul-crushing. And you get sexually harassed a hell of a lot in that job anyway as a waitress.
Yeah. Like,
there's so much.
Like fast food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or fucking academia. I mean, if you want to talk about like a labor practice, an industry that exploits people, like holy fucking shit, academia.
Oh yeah, it just wrings you out. Yeah.
It is so bad.
Oh God, it's fucking horrible.
Yeah.
And you know, half the if I did ever feel shame about sex work, and I don't really, and I never did, but mainly in corresponding with my, thank God now, former mentor. It wouldn't even be the sex work as much as it would be like, oh, you're doing sex work means that you failed as an academic. Right? Like
the amount of time you're supposed to put in to adjuncting or being a PhD, getting a PhD, it's like there's what does not leave you with a schedule that would accommodate many professions.
Right.
So it's like, unless you somehow find a retail job that lets you work 10 hours a week and pays your rent, you know?
Yeah. No, it's ridiculous. You know, especially in our pandemic world, I find I'm doing 10 times the labor, and I'm not trained to teach online. That's like a very specific skill that you need to cultivate. And now, especially, I'm like, I'm not getting fucking paid to sit on Zoom for 14 hours a day. Like, I'm not. Fuck this.
Yeah. Oh, God. Anyway, so could you recommend a way to learn more about this stuff, research this stuff?
So yeah, I think that if you're writing a sex worker character into a piece of fiction, and the best way to make sure that you're representing that correctly is to ask a sex worker to serve as like a sensitivity reader to make sure that this is like actually legit. And of course, not all sex workers are going to have the same experience, but the stigma we face is pretty similar. So it's easy to identify these like stereotypes and easy to see where, or I think, you know, like similarly, like I'm Jewish, and if I find that when I watch movies with anti-Semitic tropes in it, I'll be the only person in my like group of friends who picks up on them. Because like, no one else is going to think like, oh, that dude has like a hooked nose and like a weird little beard and like a pointy. chain or
Right.
whatever.
Oh, the Gringotts goblins and the Harry Potter movies have a giant Star of David on the floor. That's interesting.
Or I think of like Despicable Me, that dude, whatever his name is, like that's the most anti-Semitic shit I've ever seen in my life, and like
Huh.
no one I've ever watched that with that agrees with me.
Right, you don't pick it up if you're just not a member of that group, and it's so fucking common in Western literature traditionally. It's like you don't even notice it.
Right.
You don't realize it's happening.
I saw a tweet a few weeks ago that was like, I might fuck around later and create an Asian character named Cho Chang.
Oh my god.
Like, uh, which, me reading Harry Potter as like a white 17-year-old or whatever didn't see that as racist, but now I'm like, good, when you put it that way, well, shit.
Yeah, oof. Or wasn't eventually didn't she create a Jewish wizard with like the most stereotypically it was like Goldstein or something like that. Like, really, you did not think about this for longer than 12 seconds, did you? Like, you could, come on.
What a shitty person, J.K. Rowling.
You're getting paid a lot of money for this. You could spend more than 12 seconds thinking of a name.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
God damn. Oh, God.
But yeah, no, I think the best way to research that is to talk to a sex worker. And, we're pretty readily available on, Twitter, for instance. Or, there are memoirs by sex workers and, films like Cam, for instance, we were talking about earlier. But the filmmaker, Issa, I want to say her last name's pronounced Mazzy, but that may be wrong. She also has a memoir called Cam Girl.
Oh.
Then there's Melissa Febos, and I'm probably butchering her name too, but her book Whipped Smart is about being a dominatrix. And she's now, I think she got her MFA. She's a writing teacher, I believe.
Cool.
Yeah. Or Antonia Crane's Spent. Reading from that perspective. And I would say the same with clients, but I don't know any client memoirs because I don't care.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, it's such a sex work is so, shrouded in shame and stigma and criminality that it's really difficult to get a right reading on it or to see, the inner workings of it.
Right.
Unless you're there. And you can't like tour a dungeon either. Like you are either working there or you are paying money. There's no other reason to be there.
Plus, I mean, the sort of people who become sex workers are often the kind of people who don't get to have this prominent social voice. I mean, women, queer people, and working class people.
Yeah.
The voice we're more likely to get is the client voice because that's the person who has money. And generally, a lot of the people who set the culture are from the background of people who have money and power.
Exactly. And I mean, there are, of course, many sex workers who don't fall into that. I think, there are some sex workers who make like six figures, who like travel the world, whatever, who have written memoirs, but that's quite unusual.
Right.
Yeah. Despite it being one of the many stereotypes that, it's interesting that we can have the assumption that people who do sex work have to be living in poverty, which in my experience is generally the case, but also the assumption that sex work is like super lucrative.
Right.
Which not really.
Right.
I mean, sure, a single session might pay well, but that's assuming, you have several sessions. That's, not accounting for the time you have to spend setting up or screening clients or cleaning up after or getting, supplies ready, whatever.
Right.
Training, laundry.
Right. Just putting on your makeup. Do you know how long it takes to put on makeup?
Oh my God, like an hour.
God.
To do my home makeup? Yeah, no, that shit is like intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't just slap on a little bit of eyeliner and be like, it's probably good.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I did have a few coworkers who would like legit just like walk into a session without like any makeup on them, but they were like so stunningly, like unbelievably beautiful, that it was fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Most of us are not that blessed.
Nope.
All right. Now, what's some fiction that gets it right?
I was thinking I couldn't really think of any fictional accounts that weren't somewhat like autobiographical, you know? So I could think of, Cam, again,
Yeah.
is an excellent example, but the filmmaker was a cam girl. Or I think of like so I was also on Horror Vanguard talking about this Polish film called The Lure, and
I've heard of that. That looks
oh my god,
fucking amazing.
It's so good. It is so fucking good. It's so good. The two protagonists are strippers, and we again, like, there's no real question as to, like, why are they strippers? Like, they just are.
Right. Oh, and for the record, listeners, in addition to being strippers, they are also cannibalistic mermaids.
Oh, yeah, who sing. It's amazing.
Yeah, let's not bury the lead there.
Yeah, no, watch it. It's incredible. It's such a good movie. I just watched it again last week.
It sounds amazing. I just heard of it yesterday, and now I am desperate to watch it. Also, because it sounds weirdly similar to a novella I wrote, kind of. I'm like, all right, I'm not the only person who's thinking of murderous pop star mermaids. Okay.
And then you can go listen to my podcast about it. Yeah, no, that's another one that just, when it's portrayed as just, there's no question into the motives.
Right.
It's so easy to get hung up on motives.
No, I had a tragic mermaid past.
Yeah, it just ends up reproducing
traumatic
the stigma.
Mermaid incident when I was a tiny baby mermaid. My mermaid dad let me down. No.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
All right. So let's wrap it up. How can our listeners find and support your work?
So I'm rather active on Twitter. You can find me at Mistress Snow, PhD. I do have a lot of writing in the works, but everything got kind of thrown off balance by the fucking coronavirus.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do have several pieces I'm working on. I'm not sure the, timeline for when they'll be coming out because there's a plague.
Right.
But yeah, follow me on Twitter. Cash App in bio. Summer is approaching and Mama's got bills to pay, but
right.
Yeah, no, follow, that's really where I'm most active. I have an Instagram that I like barely fucking use, so yeah, ignore that. But yeah, Mistress Snow, PhD. That's 3 S's in a row.
Okay, well, thank you so much again for coming by. That was really fun.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, audience, for listening. That's all for this episode. If you like what you heard, head on over to patreon.com/writegood and subscribe. Patrons get early access to our regular episodes and a monthly bonus episode in which we focus on a notable work of fiction. And join us next time when we talk about the relationship between storyteller and audience. Until then, keep writing good.
KittySneezes.com in color.